Hey everybody, today I'm out in Detroit getting hands-on with the Buick Enclave. This is Buick's three-row family-friendly SUV, and it has received some pretty significant changes for its third generation. We get more power under the hood from a standard turbocharged engine, and we have a completely redesigned interior with more luxury touches and more premium finishes than ever before. If you're looking at something like an Acura MDX and you probably want to spend a little bit less, you might want to take a look at something like this. Also, if you're shopping for a Lexus TX and you want a slightly more premium interior, I would argue you're going to find it in this Buick. The easiest thing for me to do is just grab the camera and take you on a tour of the Enclave. So let's go ahead and start there. Over here in silver, we have the Avenir trim, and over there in red, we have the ST trim. There's also going to be a base preferred trim, and it's going to have a grille that's going to be a little bit different than you see here, but it's going to have a lot of the same standard equipment, like the same standard full LED headlights. You'll find the turn signals and DRLs up top, headlights down there below, and that model will have standard 20-inch alloy wheels. Obviously, you're going to find bigger and more interesting wheels on the top end trims, just as you'd expect. Now for this generation, the GMC Acadia, the Buick Enclave, and the Chevy Traverse are all basically the same size. In the last generation, there were two sizes, and the GMC Acadia was a little bit smaller. So these three vehicles all have very similar proportions on the outside, but definitely different styling in this generation, help differentiate them a little bit more clearly from one another. Now back here in the rear, the Buick has a pretty distinctive taillight arrangement. These are sort of crystal when they're off, and then they illuminate red when they're on. You're going to find these in the Avenir trim. Let's go over here and take a look at the ST trim so you can see the difference. Starting out, we have different wheels, obviously, in this model. Pretty wide 275 width tires are going to be available. Very similar headlights and turn signals there. Different grille, of course, with that ST logo right in there. It definitely has the family resemblance that we've seen in the other Buick models. To prove that point, they've brought along a number of the other Buick models. You can see that sort of shark's head design there. I wasn't sure initially how I felt about that applied to a vehicle quite as large as the Enclave, but I think it actually works better in person than it did when I first saw some of the spy shots out there. Moving around to the back of this particular ST trim, you can see that the taillights are very similar, but these are red tinted all the time. So there's definitely a bit of an additional bit of jewelry on the back, you might say, on that Avenir trim. A little bit more of a sportier look over here on the ST trim. We have dual exhaust tips down there at the bottom of the bumper, and then when properly configured, this will tow up to 5,000 pounds. Now, rather unfortunately, I can't show you under the hood, but under here we have a 2.5-liter four-cylinder turbocharged engine, basically the same one from the GMC and the Chevy. It's going to produce 326 horsepower, 325 pound-feet of torque, and it's going to send power to the ground via an 8-speed automatic transmission. Fuel economy is going to be a little bit higher than the outgoing models, but I don't have exact numbers just yet. Now let's take a look at the interior, because obviously this is a big departure from the previous generation model. Unlike some of the competition, this is one enormous screen. So that line right there between the two areas of the LCD, that's actually just in the software. And it is indeed one huge LCD all the way from the middle of the car all the way on over to the driver's side. You'll also notice a big change here with the steering wheel. That's because we can now get Cadillac's Super Cruise system moved down here into the Buick lineup. One thing I've always loved about Super Cruise is that the driver monitoring system and basically the readout to tell you what the system is doing is integrated into this section of the steering wheel. It really makes the dashboard a lot cleaner than some of those driver monitoring systems that are mounted somewhere else on the vehicle. It just integrates better, and it's really obvious what the car's up to when this flashes the various different colors. Green when it's in operation, blue when it's ready, red if you need to take over. There's also a head-up display right there on top of the dashboard. And speaking of the dashboard, I really love this two-tone ivory and blue interior. Let me know what you think about that. The upper section of the dashboard is an injection molded component. It's then been after stitched to dress it up a little bit. And then we have actually some stitched components lower on the dash. You'll notice we have some premium features in here that you don't normally find in a mainstream vehicle, like a powered memory-linked tilt telescopic steering column. We also find four-way adjustable lumbar support standard in every Enclave model. This particular model has the more adjustable seats with inflatable bolsters and the seat massage functionality right there. We'll take a look at that in a little bit greater detail in just a moment. And more premium finishes pretty much everywhere in the vehicle. The same two-tone setup goes on over here on the doors, where we have that injection molded upper section of the door, a stitched midsection with kind of an eccentric perforation pattern in there, kind of goes from no perforation up here to a lot of perforation in a little pattern. This is not real wood trim, it is imitation wood, but I think it's done really nicely. We have the seat memory buttons over here on that side, and then the Bose Performance audio system right over there. Moving over to the passenger side, you can see that we have a new front seat design with contrasting piping and some additional stitching to help dress things up a little bit. This interior has sort of gold-colored accents here and there. That was something I wasn't quite sure about, again, until I really saw it in person, but I do like the effect. Moving back over to the dashboard, again, injection molded upper section, the stitched mid section, and then the blue wraps all the way around that component to help dress things up and really coordinate everything together. There's sort of a brushed metal effect trim right there on top, and we have a pretty decently sized bin-style glove compartment over there on that side. I love the fact that GM didn't just differentiate the look of this from the GMC and the Chevy on the outside. They also gave it a very, very different vibe on the inside with this really wide single LCD here in the dash rather than the separate horizontal or vertical screens, and then different climate control buttons. That's what those are, running right there across the dashboard. Two really big air vents there, and then we find the infotainment controller knob right over here and a Qi wireless charging mat because the shifter, that's been moved over here to the steering column. So very much in keeping with General Motors' electric vehicle lineup. Also a little bit different, the steering wheel itself. It's definitely a new design that we've also seen in the Buick Envision for 2024. So cruise control buttons over here on this side, controls for the infotainment system over there on that side. And again, it's power memory linked with those two nearly identical little stalks behind. I like that coordinated design effort right there. By moving that shifter up there, they've given us more room in the center console for storage. You can see that we have those two big cup holders right there and an enormous storage bin just below that. You can see that's a lot of area down there for purses or other bags or things like that. And then of course we still have a pretty decently sized storage cubby right here in the center of everything. Nice and large. On the back of that we have two cup holders for the second row passengers. Let's go ahead and take a look at that second row now. Starting out on the doors, we find door construction that's very similar to the front, so that injection molded upper section right there, stitched lower section. The only thing I found a little odd back here is that this area right here where you might want to rest your elbow, that's actually a hard plastic in the rear, but it's not up front. Back here we find a captain's chair arrangement in the second row of every Enclave. Yep, there's not going to be a bench seat option. If you want that, you're going to have to take a look at the GMC or the Chevy. But as you can see, we have a big panoramic moonroof up there and lots of legroom. This driver's seat is almost all the way back in its tracks, and as you can see, I have just tons of legroom back here. We have additional climate controls for the second row right there in the middle. Also a power inverter outlet, USB charge-only ports, and then down here there's actually a little bit of a storage cubby right under all of that. Again, those two cup holders right there in the center. I'm glad that we no longer have cup holders in the doors because that's always something I was a little bit concerned about as far as having drinks splashed around the interior when kids close the door in the back. You can see that the driver and front passenger get height adjustable shoulder belts and height adjustable headrests right there. And they've put the air vents for the back passengers up here in the ceiling. That's definitely a location that I prefer. Also something I really appreciate is the amount of headroom we find back here. Even though we have this large panoramic moonroof, I still have maybe about 1.5 inches of headroom left. And if you have kids in forward-facing child seats, you're going to love this feature. Not only do these seats fold flat like that for cargo carrying in the back, they will also tilt and slide in a manner that would let you leave a forward-facing child seat latched into place. That is considerably handier than something like a Pilot or even the new Grand Highlander. You can't do that. Now clearly this is only going to work with booster seats or forward-facing seats. If your kids are in rear-facing seats, then obviously the seat's not going to move in a way that's useful, but you could still step right there through the middle if you needed to do that. Now let's check out the third row. As you'd expect, the seat bottom cushion is a little bit lower to the ground than some folks might like, but things back here are relatively nice. We have hard plastics, as you'd expect in a mainstream 3-row vehicle. Actually, you'll find hard plastics even in the back of the Acura MDX. The rear windows do seem a little bit smaller than the ones on the Traverse or the Acadia, so if you're worried about third-row passengers maybe getting car sick back here, that might be one reason to get the GMC over this. But we have air vents integrated into the ceiling. That's actually a really fantastic location for them. You can see that big panoramic moonroof right there. Now, the second row seats, they are slid all the way back, and that means that if I try and come in back here, you'll notice I don't quite fit in the rear. This is a 3-person bench in the third row, and that's how all Enclave models are going to seat 7 passengers. If you want 8-passenger seating, you're going to have to look at the GMC or the Chevy. Now at the moment, I don't have official headroom specifications, but I suspect this is going to be one of the biggest third rows in this segment. Definitely bigger, I think, than the Grand Highlander. Just check out the amount of headroom that I have back here. Even if I were to move over here to the middle seat position, I have maybe about 2 inches of headroom left. This is a very surprisingly roomy third row. And again, I really love the position of the air vents. I don't mind this middle seat position shoulder belt coming out of the ceiling. I kind of wish it did come out of the seat back, but that's pretty common back here in the third row. Something that more people might be concerned about, though, is the width of the third row. This is obviously not going to be as wide as the third row in a Suburban or a Tahoe or something like that. So if you are cross-shopping this with GM's larger three-row SUVs, that is something to keep in mind. On the other hand, you should probably also keep in mind that you'll actually find less practical storage space in some of those full-size SUVs than we find back here. I don't have official specifications, but I suspect this is going to be well over 21 cubic feet back here in the way back behind the third row. It's really nice and deep, so I had no problem fitting my 22-inch roller bags back here. In fact, for reference, here is one right now, and as you can see, it will fit long ways in this cargo area. This is the only entry in this segment that I can think of where a bag can actually be sitting back here, and you could actually line up bags all the way across the rear and still close the power hatch. Then if we lift open the load floor, you'll notice two things. The first one is that the load floor actually stays in this upright position right there because of the way it's hinged, and then we have this absolutely enormous cargo well where, you guessed it, you can actually fit one of those large roller bags right in there like that, and you can almost close the lid on a bag that size. Now don't worry, GM has not forgotten about the spare tire. There's actually one even further down the rabbit hole. You'd unscrew these little hand nuts right there on each side, pull that plastic tray out, and then there is a spare tire underneath everything down there. I'm not normally the biggest fan of power third row seats. The controls over here on this side, but check out how fast these power fold mechanisms are. I have to admit that if all power folding third row seats were this fast, I would probably be just fine with them. And this is real time. This is not sped up video at all. Also a nice touch, you can power fold the second row seats forward with the buttons back here. And then with the second row and the third row seats folded, you'll get nearly minivan style cargo room back here. Also another really practical touch. I don't know all of the dimensions, so I don't know whether you'd be able to fit 4x sheet items between the wheel wells, but I suspect you might be able to do that. Moving over to the ST trim, you'll notice that most of the design is very similar. Obviously, this has more of a monochromatic sporty look, but we still have the contrasting piping and contrasting stitching. We also have kind of a cool texture going on there with the perforations on the leather upholstery, really giving this a more interesting and elegant look. The only downside here, of course, is that there is a reasonable amount of shiny black plastic in the center console. I do worry about that scratching over time. Now, this is a pre-production model, so these plastics might not be production intent, but some of the plastics are already a little bit scratched in this model. And in case you're wondering, yes, again, it is that exact same black plastic over here in the Avenir. As you can see in this ST trim, we have embroidered headrests on even the middle seats, which is a nice touch. And then the latch anchors for child seats appear to be pretty easy to interact with. They actually have stitching right around here so you can more easily locate that latch anchor point, and a pretty wide walkway between those seats to get back there to the rear. Be sure and sound off in the comment section below. Let me know what you think of the design of the new Enclave. I really appreciate some of the smaller touches, like these light pipes integrated into the rear taillight modules. This is a really cool and elegant design. If you look at them really closely, you can actually see the big acrylic light pipe inside the light module. And then if we look at this, it has sort of a knurled texture on this side of the light pipe. That's all inside that module. There's also a corresponding one on the other side. The LEDs are firing from back here towards that diffuses the light, but it also gives you this crystal clear appearance running right there across the vehicle. It's a really elegant touch in what's ostensibly a premium mainstream vehicle, not a direct competitor to Lexus. But oddly enough, I think I like this interior design especially more than the current generation Lexus TX. And there are things in here that you won't find in that Lexus like Cadillac Super Cruise. Although obviously there are things you won't find in here that you will find in the Lexus, like a plug-in hybrid system or a hybrid system of any description. But I do think this interior looks a bit more premium, and so far I think the seats are a little bit more comfortable and certainly a little bit roomier than that Lexus as well. Now, as often happens at launch events like this, I don't know exact pricing or availability information for the new Enclave just yet. The current model spans from around $46,000 on up to around $61,000. Comparably equipped, this is probably going to stick pretty close to that. Expect it to be a bit more expensive, of course, for the new model year. But if you want some of the more advanced features, expect the price tag to ratchet up a little bit more over the previous model. Buick has said that their brand positioning is sort of mainstream premium. So they want a solid amount of overlap with mainstream alternatives, say something like a Grand Highlander or something along those lines. But they also want folks that maybe are interested in some luxury features to consider a Buick instead of something like an Acura MDX or a Lexus. So expect a reasonable amount of pricing overlap between both the mainstream and the luxury categories, depending on exactly which version you're looking at. My guess is that a fully loaded Avenir trim is probably going to come in around $65,000 or so. That's going to be significantly less expensive than a lot of those luxury options. And really nothing outside of a Cadillac luxury option is going to give you a feature like Cadillac Super Cruise. If you want to get your hands on one of these, you should probably reach out to your local Buick dealer soon, because supposedly these will be on sale later in summer of 2024. So only a few months away after you're watching this video. Closer to its on sale date is probably when we're going to know more exact pricing, especially some of the options pricing on the various trims. And those options are kind of an intriguing thing, because you will not just find Super Cruise on the top end Avenir trim, it will be available in the other two trims of Enclave as well. So if you want that hands-free driving assistance system and you don't need all the features and functions on the Avenir, you'll be able to get that on the base model. But speaking of base models, it's not as basic as a lot of the mainstream options. And that really goes with Buick's positioning. Features like the 12-speaker Bose audio system, that's standard. The big 30-inch LCD in the dashboard, that's also standard. And we get 20-inch alloy wheels in the base model. We also get a ton of active driver assistance technologies in the base version as well, including more active safety tech than we found last year. So features like rear autonomous emergency braking, that's now standard in the Enclave. It wasn't available in the previous generation. And then, of course, every Enclave is going to get more power, because that 2.5-liter turbocharged engine is the only engine offered under the hood. It produces notably more power than the outgoing V6 and notably more torque at lower RPMs, while also giving you better fuel economy. I don't have exact fuel economy numbers yet. They are probably going to be out by the time this video is released, so there might be an on-screen overlay to tell you what those numbers are, but we should be expecting maybe about 22 miles per gallon or so combined, depending on exactly which version of this we're looking at. So be sure and sound off down there in the comment section below. What do you think of the design of the new Enclave? Do you think that the front-end design from the rest of the Buick lineup has been adapted well to the larger three-row vehicle, or do you prefer the look in the GMC or the Chevy triplets? Because of course you can get some of this feature content in those models. So if you'd prefer a separate infotainment screen, you can find it over there. If you'd prefer this more elegant curved single display, you're going to find it over here. I really appreciate the fact that GM has made these three vehicles look more different than they have ever looked before. And I think it really bodes well for the future of all three of these options in the US. If I were shopping in this segment, I think it would be a really tough call between the GMC and this Buick, because I love aspects of both. I love the blue and ivory interior that we saw in that Avenir trim a little bit earlier, and I love the single curved display that we find here, but I also appreciate the 8-passenger functionality that we find in that GMC. Let me know what you think about all that down there in the comment section below, and stay tuned, because I'm going to be driving the Traverse by the time you're watching this video. So be sure and stay tuned for that video. Obviously, I will be driving one of these a little bit later in the year as well. So I'll see all of you next week.